The oil in the cast iron pan crackled as Knox cracked the third egg. He kept his movements small, controlled. The kitchen felt too quiet, like the moment before thunder. His shoulders tensed when he heard the rumble of Silas's truck in the driveway. Knox didn't turn around when the front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. The heavy boots crossed the hardwood floor in the living room. Each step made Knox's jaw clench tighter. "You take my charger again, nerd." The voice came from directly behind him. Knox kept his eyes on the eggs. "Yours broke last week." Mom said to share. He heard the sharp intake of breath, felt the air shift. Then Silas's hand grabbed the back of his collar and yanked him away from the stove that Knox's back hit the refrigerator with a metallic crash. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs. Before he could recover, Silas drove his knee up into Knox's face with the precision of someone who'd done this before. Pain exploded across Knox's nose and cheekbones. Blood filled his mouth, warm and metallic. His vision went white, then red, then spotty black around the edges. He dropped to his knees, one hand grabbing the kitchen island's edge to keep from hitting the floor completely. "Maybe next time you'll ask before taking things that don't belong to you," Silas said. His voice was calm now, like he just fixed a minor problem. Knox tasted copper and salt. He blinked until his vision cleared, then reached for the cordless phone on the counter. His fingers were almost around it when another hand snatched it away. "Don't even think about it." Marla's voice cut through the ringing in Knox's ears. "It's just a scratch." Knox looked up at his mother. Her face showed no emotion, no concern, no anger at Silas. Just blank annoyance, like Knox had spilled something on the carpet. "I need to call." "You don't need to call anyone." She set the phone back in its cradle. "Stop being dramatic." Curtis appeared in the kitchen doorway, glanced at Knox bleeding on the floor, and shrugged. "Drama king again." He folded his newspaper under his arm. "Some of us have real problems, son." Knox stared at his father, at his mother, at Silas, who was already heading toward the stairs like nothing had happened. Blood dripped from his nose onto the white kitchen tiles. Each drop made a small splash. Knox counted them. 1, 2, 3. First, he wiped his face with the back of his hand and stood up slowly. His nose felt crooked. The taste of blood wouldn't go away. But something else had changed too. Something in his chest. Not broken. Hardened. "This is the last time," he said quietly. None of them heard him. They were already gone. Knox turned off the stove and scraped the burnt eggs into the garbage. The smell of burnt food mixed with the metallic scent of his own blood. He stood there for a moment, listening to the house settle back into its usual quiet hostility. Silas was upstairs playing video games. Curtis had retreated to his recliner. Marla was doing dishes like nothing had happened. Knox walked upstairs to the bathroom and locked the door. He gripped the sink edge and stared at himself in the mirror. The damage was extensive. His nose sat crooked, definitely broken. The area under his left eye was already swelling, the skin turning purple-black. Blood had dried in thick streaks down his chin and neck, staining his white t-shirt. His lower lip was split where his teeth had cut into it. Knox touched his nose gently and winced. The pain was sharp and immediate. He'd need medical attention, but he knew better than to ask for it now. Instead, he turned on the cold water and began washing the blood away carefully. Knox pulled out his phone and took pictures. Front view, left profile, right profile. Close-up of the nose showing the clear deviation from center. Close-up of the eye swelling. Full face showing the overall damage. He took 23 photos total, adjusting the lighting, checking for clarity, making sure every detail was visible and undeniable. Between each photo, Knox paused to think about angles, about what a jury would see, about what questions a lawyer might ask. He'd researched enough abuse cases to know that documentation was everything. Poor lighting or unclear images could be dismissed as inconclusive. But these photos were crystal clear in his bedroom. Knox sat at his desk and opened his laptop. The familiar glow of the screen felt calming after the chaos downstairs. He navigated to a folder buried deep in his file system. Insurance, family truth date _0, 7_10. The folder structure looked innocent enough, just insurance documents to anyone who might stumble across it. He uploaded all 23 photos, then opened a spreadsheet he'd been maintaining for 2 years. Each row was a carefully documented incident. Each column captured crucial details that would matter in court: date, time, location, type of injury, witnesses present, detailed description, medical attention sought, parental response. Knox typed slowly, choosing each word carefully. July 10th. 6:47 p.m. Kitchen. Broken nose, facial bruising, split lip. Marla Rayner present, Curtis Rayner present. Silas grabbed me from behind while I was cooking, slammed me into refrigerator door, drove me in the face with deliberate force. Parents refused medical attention. Marla took phone away when I attempted to call for help. Curtis dismissed injury as drama. The clinical language helped Knox stay focused. Emotion wouldn't help him in court. Facts would. Knox saved the file and immediately backed it up to 3 different cloud drives he'd set up using different email addresses. He'd learned early that single points of failure could destroy everything. If his laptop was confiscated or destroyed, if one cloud service went down, if his parents discovered one account, he needed redundancy. Then he opened a new browser window and started researching Ohio child abuse laws. He'd done this research before, but tonight felt different. Tonight, he wasn't just gathering information for someday. Tonight, he was building a timeline for action, mandatory reporting requirements. Who was legally obligated to report suspected abuse? What constituted evidence? How to file for emergency protection orders. Legal emancipation procedures for minors. The difference between civil and criminal cases. Knox made detailed notes in a separate document. Every teacher who had asked questions over the years when he'd shown up with bruises. Mrs. Peterson, the guidance counselor who'd given him her card last month. The school nurse who documented a suspicious injury last fall and asked pointed questions about how it happened. Dr. Martinez at the urgent care clinic who'd looked skeptical when Curtis explained Knox's dislocated shoulder as a sports injury. These weren't random people who might help. These were potential witnesses with professional obligations to report abuse. People who'd already seen evidence but hadn't had enough to act on. People who were probably waiting for someone to give them permission to speak up. Knox opened a new spreadsheet and began cataloging every adult who'd shown concern. Names, positions, dates of interaction, what they'd observed, what questions they'd asked. Another database. Another tool in his arsenal. By midnight, Knox had 17 pages of research and a rough timeline going back 3 years. 42 documented incidents, cross-referenced with school attendance records, ER visits, and photographs. Medical records from 2 emergency room visits where Curtis had lied about how Knox got hurt. Once claiming a fall downstairs for what was clearly knuckle-shaped bruises on Knox's ribs. Once blaming a bike accident for a black eye that showed finger-shaped pressure marks. Knox pulled up the school district's attendance database and cross-referenced his absences with his injury log. The pattern was clear. Every time Knox missed school for mysterious illness, it coincided with injuries too visible to explain away. Days when his face was too bruised, his movement too stiff, his explanations too thin, that a lawyer would see this pattern immediately. A judge would find it compelling. A jury would find it damning. Knox wasn't planning revenge in the traditional sense. He wasn't fantasizing about hurting anyone or making them suffer. He was documenting a case with the systematic precision of a prosecutor building toward conviction. The research consumed him until 3 a.m. By then, Knox had built a comprehensive understanding of his legal options and the evidence required to pursue them. He understood exactly what he needed to prove and how to prove it. More importantly, he understood that he wasn't actually helpless. The system had tools for people like him. He just had to know how to use them. The next morning, Knox wrapped an elastic bandage around his wrist to hide the bruises from yesterday's grab. He told the first teacher who asked that he'd fallen off his skateboard. During lunch, Knox stopped by the guidance office. Mrs. Peterson looked up from her computer when he knocked on the open door. She was younger than most of the other counselors, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Knox, come in. How are you doing? Good. I wanted to ask about college prep stuff. Knox sat down across from her desk, noting how she immediately gave him her full attention. Getting started early, you know? That's wonderful. What specifically did you want to know? Knox pulled out a notebook and pen. I've been reading about different options for students who might not have traditional family support. Like, what if someone needs to be more independent than usual? Mrs. Peterson leaned forward slightly. Knox caught the subtle shift in her expression. Professional interest mixed with concern. Independent how? I don't know. Like if their family situation was complicated or difficult. Knox kept his voice casual, conversational. I read about legal emancipation online. When would someone need that? Well, emancipation is for minors who can prove they can support themselves financially and that remaining with their parents isn't in their best interest. Mrs. Peterson chose her words carefully. Usually that involves unsafe conditions at home. What counts as unsafe? Physical abuse, severe neglect, situations where the minor's well-being or safety is at risk. She paused, studying Knox's face. Knox, is this hypothetical question about you? Knox looked down at his notebook and wrote something. I'm just researching all my options. Being thorough about planning for the future. That's very mature of you. Mrs. Peterson's voice was gentle. But if a student told me they were being hurt at home, I'd be legally required to report that to Child Protective Services. It's the law in Ohio. Even if they just asked hypothetically, even then, if I had reasonable suspicion that a student was in danger, I couldn't ignore that. Knox nodded and made another note. Good to know. For the research, Mrs. Peterson was quiet for a moment. Knox, you know you could talk to me about anything, right? If something is happening at home that makes you feel unsafe, everything's fine at home. Knox met her eyes directly. I just like to be prepared for different scenarios. Of course. But just so you know, my door is always open if you need someone to talk to. Knox thanked her and left, but he could feel her watching him as he walked down the hallway. She suspected something. That was useful to know. That afternoon, Knox sat in his car in the school parking lot and opened his phone. He scrolled through his recordings folder until he found what he needed. The audio file from 3 weeks ago, when Silas had been screaming at him about college applications, calling him worthless, threatening to beat some sense into him if he didn't stop acting like he was better than everyone. Knox plugged in earbuds and listened to the recording again. Silas's voice was clear, angry, escalating. You think you're so smart with your college plans? You're nothing but a freak who thinks he's better than his own family. Maybe I need to remind you where you stand in this house. Maybe I need to beat some respect into you. The audio was 90 seconds of pure verbal abuse, punctuated by the sound of Silas slamming his fist against Knox's bedroom door. Perfect evidence of threats and intimidation. Knox edited the file carefully, cutting out any parts where his own voice might be heard, focusing on Silas's most damaging statements. He uploaded the edited version to a file-sharing site, then created a new Proton Mail account using the school's public Wi-Fi network. The message he composed was simple and direct. A student at your school is being hurt at home. This recording shows the kind of threats he receives regularly. Please help. Knox attached the audio file and sent it to Mrs. Peterson's official email address. Then he deleted the Proton Mail account and cleared his browser history. 2 days later, Knox was eating breakfast when the doorbell rang. He heard Marla answer it, her voice polite but cautious. Mrs. Rayner? I'm Janet Walsh from Child Protective Services. We received a report concerning your son Lennox. May we come in to speak with you? Knox continued eating his cereal, but every muscle in his body was tense. This was the moment he'd been working toward. Everything depended on how carefully he played this. Of course, Marla said, though Knox could hear the strain in her voice. Knox, can you come to the living room, please? Knox walked into the living room, where a middle-aged woman in a business suit sat across from his parents. She had short gray hair and tired eyes, but her posture was alert and professional. Hello, Knox. I'm Ms. Walsh. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your home situation. Is that okay? Knox nodded and sat down on the edge of the couch, keeping space between himself and his parents. Have you been experiencing any problems at home? Any conflicts with your family members? Knox glanced at his parents, then back at Ms. Walsh. Normal stuff, I guess. Brothers fight sometimes. I see you have some bruising on your wrist there. Ms. Walsh pointed to where the elastic bandage had shifted, revealing purple finger marks. How did that happen? I fell off my bike yesterday. Ms. Walsh made a note. That looks like it might be finger-shaped bruising. Are you sure it was from a fall? Knox felt his heart racing, but kept his voice steady. Yeah, I felt pretty hard. Knox, you can tell me the truth. If someone in your family is hurting you, it's important that you speak up. Nothing bad will happen to you for telling the truth. Knox looked directly at Ms. Walsh. No one's hurting me. Sometimes my brother and I get into it, but that's normal, right? Ms. Walsh continued asking questions for 20 minutes. About school, about his relationship with his parents and brother, about any injuries he'd sustained recently. Knox gave careful answers, nothing that would trigger immediate removal from the home, but enough to establish that there had been previous concerns, that this wasn't the first time questions had been raised. After Ms. Walsh left, Curtis slammed the door and turned to Knox. What did you tell them? Nothing. I said I fell off my bike. Good, because if I find out you've been running your mouth to outsiders about family business. You'll what? Knox interrupted, his voice calm. Hit me? Because that's exactly what got them here in the first place. Curtis stepped forward, his fists clenched, but Marla grabbed his arm. Don't, she hissed. Not now. They could come back. Knox watched his father struggle with the desire to hit him and the knowledge that he couldn't. Not today. Not with CPS watching. This better be the end of it, Curtis said finally, but Knox saw the fear in his eyes. Saw how his hands shook as he walked away. How Marla kept glancing toward the windows like she expected more visitors. The seed was planted. The system was aware. Now Knox just had to nurture their attention until it grew into action. The seed was planted. Now he just had to make it grow. That night, Knox updated his spreadsheet, added the CPS visit, documented his parents' reactions, started a new section, official interventions. He was 17 years old, and he was done being a victim. Knox studied Brinley Morrison across the cafeteria with the same methodical attention he gave to everything else in his life. She sat with the other cheerleaders at their usual table by the windows, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail, her smile bright and practiced as she listened to Silas tell some exaggerated story about his weekend. But Knox noticed details others missed. The way Brinley's smile faltered for just a second when Silas's voice got louder. How she unconsciously moved her chair back when he leaned too close, creating distance. The quick glances she made toward the exit doors when his gestures became too animated. The way her shoulders tensed when he touched her arm possessively. Knox had been documenting these interactions for 2 weeks, building a psychological profile. Silas's need for control. His inability to read social cues when his temper flared. The way other people responded to his presence with subtle signs of discomfort. Brinley was popular, confident, and smart enough to be student body treasurer. But she was also dating someone who showed clear signs of controlling behavior. Someone whose temper Knox knew firsthand was both explosive and dangerous. During his study hall, Knox opened his laptop and navigated to the audio folder he'd been building for months. Silas had no idea how much he recorded himself just by being loud, by never considering who might be listening when he vented his anger. Knox selected 3 specific recordings. First, Silas threatening Knox after a minor disagreement about chores. You think you can disrespect me in my own house? I'll teach you a lesson you won't forget. Second, Silas cursing at the television during a football game, his language growing increasingly violent as his team lost. Third, Silas on the phone with a friend, bragging about how he'd put some kid in his place at school. Knox imported all 3 files into audio editing software he'd learned to use through online tutorials. He cut the clips carefully, removing context but preserving the threatening tone. He spliced them together with natural pauses between segments, creating a narrative of escalating aggression. The final touch was the most crucial. Knox had a recording from last month when Curtis had slapped Marla. During an argument, the sharp crack of palm against skin was unmistakable. Knox isolated just that sound and inserted it at the end of Silas's threats, making it seem like the verbal abuse had escalated to physical violence. The edited audio was 90 seconds of disturbing content that sounded authentic because most of it was. Knox had simply arranged the pieces to tell a story that revealed Silas's true nature. He uploaded the file to a burner Instagram account he'd created at the public library, using their public Wi-Fi and a computer that couldn't be traced back to him. The account had no posts, no followers, no identifying information. Knox sent the audio to Brinley with a message that was simple and direct. "You're next." 3 days later, Knox positioned himself by the vending machines near Silas's locker, close enough to observe, but far enough away to avoid being seen as eavesdropping. He was buying a soda when Brinley approached Silas after his last class. "We need to talk," Brinley said. Her voice was tight with tension. Silas looked up from stuffing textbooks into his locker, grinning. "Sure, babe. What's up?" "Someone sent me a recording of you, saying violent things." The grin disappeared from Silas's face. "What recording? You threatening someone? Talking about teaching them lessons?" And then, Brinley's voice dropped. "It sounded like you hit them." "I never hit anyone." Silas's voice rose enough that other students in the hallway turned to look. "So you're saying that wasn't your voice?" "I mean, maybe I said some stuff when I was mad, but I never." "Brinley, this is crazy. Who sent it to you?" "It doesn't matter who sent it. What matters is whether you did it." Silas ran his hands through his hair, clearly struggling to find the right words. "Look, sometimes I get frustrated with my little brother. He can be really disrespectful, but I would never seriously hurt anyone. That's not what it sounded like. Come on, don't be like this. You know me. I'm not some psycho who beats people up." But Brinley was already stepping backward, creating more distance between them. "Do I know you?" "Because the guy in that recording sounded exactly like you when you get angry at referees during games. Or when someone cuts you off in traffic. That's completely different." "Is it?" Brinley's voice was getting louder now, attracting more attention from passing students. "You have a temper, Silas. I've seen it. I just never thought about what happens when you're alone with someone who can't fight back." Knox watched Silas's face cycle through emotions: confusion, anger, desperation. This was exactly the reaction Knox had predicted. Silas was too impulsive to lie convincingly under pressure. "This is insane," Silas said. "Whoever sent you, that is trying to mess with us. Can't you see that? Why would someone make something like that up? I don't know. Maybe someone jealous of what we have." Brinley shook her head. "That recording wasn't fake, Silas. That was your voice saying horrible things. So what if I said some things I didn't mean? Everyone says stupid stuff when they're angry. Not everyone threatens to hurt people. Not everyone sounds like they actually enjoy the idea of violence." Knox could see other students stopping to watch now. The argument was becoming public, which made it even better for his purposes. "We're done," Brinley said finally. "I can't date someone who talks like that. I can't trust someone who might lose their temper with me the way you obviously do with other people." Brinley waited, but she was already walking away, her teammates falling into step beside her, shooting disapproving looks back at Silas. Knox watched Silas stand there for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then Silas turned and punched his locker with enough force to dent the metal. The crash echoed through the hallway. "What are you all looking at?" Silas shouted at the other students. Knox pulled out his phone and started recording as Silas kicked a trash can, sending it rolling across the floor with a clatter. The other students scattered, but Knox captured it all. Silas cursing, destroying school property, completely out of control. Perfect evidence of exactly the kind of unstable behavior that had just cost him his girlfriend. The Riverside Diner was exactly the kind of place Knox had expected to find Zadie Colburn. Cheap coffee, torn vinyl booths, and the kind of anonymity that came from being just another struggling student trying to make ends meet. Zadie was already there when Knox arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of coffee and a stack of what looked like job applications. She'd changed since high school. Thinner, more tired, but with a sharpness in her eyes that suggested she'd learned to navigate the world on her own terms. "Knox." She looked genuinely surprised when he slid into the seat across from her. "I have to admit, your text was pretty mysterious. What's this about?" Knox had known Zadie from a group project in AP History junior year. She'd been the kind of student who was clearly smart but always looked exhausted, who wore the same 3 outfits in rotation and sometimes fell asleep during class. Knox had learned later that she'd been bouncing between foster homes, working part-time jobs, and still managing to maintain a B+ average. "I need help with something complicated," Knox said, "and I think you might understand the situation better than most people." Zadie's expression became guarded. She'd clearly learned to be suspicious of people who claimed to need her help. "Help with what?" Knox pulled out a manila folder and set on the table between them. "My family situation. It's not good." and I need to do something about it. He opened the folder and slid the first set of photos across the table. Zadie's face didn't change as she looked at them, but Knox saw her hands tighten around her coffee cup. "How long has this been going on?" she asked quietly. "Years. But it's getting worse, and I'm tired of waiting for someone else to fix it." Knox showed her more evidence. The spreadsheet with documented incidents, audio recordings of threats, the timeline cross-referenced with medical records and school absences. Zadie examined everything methodically, asking pointed questions about documentation methods and evidence chain of custody. Knox realized she understood the legal implications better than he'd expected. "You've been building a case," she said finally. "Yes. Why show me this?" Knox leaned forward. "Because you survived the system. You know how it really works, not how it's supposed to work. You know the difference between having evidence and having evidence that people will actually act on." Zadie was quiet for a long moment, studying Knox's face. "What exactly do you want to do?" "Get out. Legally. Permanently. With enough documentation that no one can ever claim I'm lying or exaggerating or manipulating the situation. That's going to take more than photos and a spreadsheet. You need technical documentation, metadata that proves authenticity, backup systems that can't be compromised." Knox felt a surge of hope. "You know how to do that?" "I know someone who does. My cousin Jericho. He's good with computers, and he doesn't ask questions about why people need certain kinds of help." Zadie picked up one of the photos of Knox's face after the kitchen incident, the bruising clear and extensive. "You're not just planning to get out, are you? You're planning to make sure they can't hurt anyone else either." "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Good. People like your family don't stop until they're forced to stop." 2 days later, Knox met Jericho at a 24-hour internet cafe downtown. The place was dim and filled with the blue glow of computer screens, frequented by night shift workers, insomniacs, and people who needed internet access without questions. Jericho was older than Knox had expected, maybe 21, with the kind of tired eyes that suggested he'd learned early that the world wasn't fair and no one was coming to save you. His hands were calloused from manual labor, but his fingers moved across the keyboard with the precision of someone who understood technology intimately. "Zadie told me what you need," Jericho said without preamble. "Show me what you've got so far." Knox opened his laptop and pulled up his carefully organized files. Photos with timestamps, audio recordings with metadata, the timeline spreadsheet with cross-reference data, his research into legal precedents and reporting requirements. Jericho examined everything systematically, asking technical questions about how Knox had created and stored the evidence, where the files were backed up, what devices had been used, how the editing had been done. "This is solid work," Jericho said finally. "But you've got some vulnerabilities. Everything traces back to your personal devices and accounts. If someone wants to claim you've fabricated evidence, they can point to your laptop, your phone, your cloud storage, and say you had both means and motive. So what do I do?" Jericho pulled out his own laptop, more sophisticated than anything Knox had seen before. "I'm going to teach you how to build an airtight case, how to create documentation that can't be questioned or dismissed." For the next 4 hours, Jericho walked Knox through techniques he'd never heard of. How to extract router logs that proved exactly when and where files were created. How to clone devices using malware deployed through public Wi-Fi networks. How to create encrypted backups across multiple cloud services with redundant access points. See, the thing about digital evidence is that people think it can be faked easily, Jericho explained as he showed Knox how to create metadata verification protocols. But if you know what you're doing, you can create documentation that's more reliable than eyewitness testimony. Knox watched as Jericho demonstrated how to set up network monitoring systems that would capture data automatically, creating timestamps that couldn't be altered after the fact. "You're not just building a case now," Jericho said as they finished up. "You're building something that could hold up in criminal court, something that prosecutors could use to build charges even if you weren't willing to testify." Knox felt something cold and satisfied settle in his chest. Perfect. The next evening, Knox decided it was time to test his new skills. He waited until Silas came home from work, timing his approach for maximum impact. Silas was in the kitchen making a sandwich when Knox walked in and opened the refrigerator. How's single life treating you? Knox asked casually. Silas's hand stopped halfway to the mustard jar. What did you say? I heard about you and Brinley. That must be rough. Shut up. Knox kept his voice conversational, almost sympathetic. I mean, getting dumped in front of half the school. That's gotta hurt. Silas slammed the mustard jar down on the counter. I said, shut up. Maybe if you didn't have such a bad temper. My temper isn't the problem. Someone's been spreading lies about me. Knox turned to face his brother directly. What kind of lies? Someone sent Brinley a recording. Made it sound like I was threatening people. Were you? It doesn't matter. It was taken out of context. Knox nodded thoughtfully. So you did threaten someone. But it was justified. I never said that. Because that's what it sounds like you're saying. That you did make threats, but whoever recorded them was wrong to share that with your girlfriend. Silas's face was getting red. Knox recognized the signs. The clenched jaw, the tight shoulders, the way Silas's hands curled into fists. You think you're so smart, Silas said. Think you're better than everyone in this family. I think I'm better than someone who threatens people and then gets angry when there are consequences. Knox saw the moment Silas snapped. The careful camera positioning he'd set up earlier would capture everything from the perfect angle. The microphone hidden in his shirt collar would record every word. Silas grabbed Knox by the front of his shirt and shoved him backward into the garage wall. The impact knocked tools off the pegboard, clattering to the concrete floor. Say that again, Silas hissed, his face inches from Knox's. You threaten people and then act like the victim when it backfires. Knox repeated calmly. Silas drove his fist into Knox's stomach. Knox doubled over, pain radiating through his torso, but forced himself to stay conscious and alert. Every word Silas said now would be recorded. Every threat would be documented. You want to keep running your smart mouth. Silas pulled Knox upright by his hair. Keep acting like you're better than me? I don't act like anything. I just am better than you. Silas hit him again, this time in the ribs. Knox gasped but didn't cry out. He cataloged the pain, noted the precise location of the impact, estimated the force behind the blow. You're nothing but a freak who thinks he's smarter than everyone else, Silas said. Maybe it's time someone taught you some respect. Knox looked directly into his brother's eyes. You mean like you're teaching me right now? The question hung in the air between them, because Silas suddenly seemed to realize what he was doing, what he was saying, how it would look to anyone watching. When Silas finally let him go, Knox had everything he needed. Clear video evidence of assault, audio recording of threats and intimidation, documentation of the escalation from verbal to physical violence. Knox straightened his shirt and walked back into the house like nothing had happened. His ribs ached and his stomach was tender, but his mind was clear and focused. He had built his case. Now it was time to present it. The next morning, Knox copied the video to a flash drive and mailed it anonymously to the principal's office. He included a note. Student violence. Investigate immediately. By noon, Silas was called to the office. By 2 p.m., he was suspended pending investigation. The family erupted at dinner. They suspended Silas because of some anonymous video, Curtis said. Someone's trying to destroy this family. Who would do something like that? Marla's voice was shrill. Knox ate quietly while they speculated about enemies and conspiracies. He watched their fear grow as they realized someone was watching. Someone was documenting. Someone was building a case against them. This is all your fault, Curtis said, pointing at Knox. You've been stirring up trouble. First CPS, now this. I didn't send any video. Don't lie to me. You set Silas up. You wanted him to hit you. Knox looked up from his plate. Why would I want him to hit me? The question hung in the air, because there was no good answer. Either Silas had a temper and Knox had triggered it, or Knox was making all up. Either way, the family looked bad. That night, Knox uploaded the video to a hidden Reddit thread with full metadata. Timestamps, location data, device information, everything that proved when and where it was recorded. That he was building more than a case now. He was building an unshakable foundation that no one could tear down. The compilation process took Knox 2 weeks to complete properly. He worked methodically, cross-referencing every piece of evidence, verifying timestamps, and ensuring that nothing could be dismissed as fabricated or incomplete. 43 documented incidents spanning 3 years. Each entry in his spreadsheet contained not just basic information, but comprehensive details that painted a clear picture of escalating abuse and systematic neglect. Medical records formed the backbone of his evidence. 2 emergency room visits where Curtis had lied about how Knox sustained his injuries. The first time, Knox had suffered 3 fractured ribs from being shoved down the basement stairs. Curtis told the ER doctor that Knox had fallen off his skateboard. But Knox had taken photos of the basement stairs before they left for the hospital, showing the blood on the concrete step where his head had hit, the scuff marks on the wall where his body had scraped against the cinder blocks. The second ER visit was for a dislocated shoulder after Silas had twisted Knox's arm behind his back during an argument about television channels. Curtis claimed it was a sports injury from football practice. But Knox wasn't on the football team, and the injury happened on a Sunday evening when there was no practice scheduled. School attendance records revealed another damning pattern. Knox had perfect attendance, except for specific days when his injuries were too visible to explain away. Days when his face was too bruised, his movement too stiff, his explanations too thin to survive scrutiny from teachers and classmates. Knox cross-referenced these absences with his photo documentation, creating a visual timeline that made the pattern undeniable. Every suspicious absence corresponded to a documented incident of violence. But the most powerful evidence was the audio and video recordings he'd collected over the past year. Not just the recent incidents he'd deliberately provoked, but months of accumulated proof showing the toxic family dynamics. Silas threatening violence during arguments. Curtis dismissing Knox's injuries as attention-seeking. Marla actively preventing Knox from seeking medical attention or calling for help. The systematic isolation, emotional abuse, and physical violence that had become normalized in their household. Knox burned everything to multiple data drives, creating redundant copies with different file structures and encryption protocols. Following Jericho's instructions, he embedded metadata verification systems that would prove the authenticity of every piece of evidence. Then he researched nonprofit organizations that specialized in teen abuse cases and legal advocacy. The Youth Advocacy Center was 30 miles away, but had a strong reputation for taking difficult cases and seeing them through to completion. Knox mailed the package on a Tuesday, including a carefully written cover letter that presented the evidence objectively without emotional appeals or dramatic language. He wanted the facts to speak for themselves. The response came faster than he'd expected. "Is this Lennox Rayner? This is Amanda Chun from the Youth Advocacy Center. We received your documentation package, and we need to meet with you as soon as possible." Knox's heart rate accelerated, but he kept his voice steady. "I can come to your office this weekend. Actually, we prefer to meet somewhere more private. The level of documentation you provided suggests an ongoing dangerous situation. Can you meet us at the downtown public library? Saturday at 2 p.m. Knox agreed and hung up. Then he sat in his room and stared at the wall, processing what was happening. After months of planning, documentation, and careful strategy, the system was finally taking him seriously. Professional advocates were reviewing his case. Lawyers were getting involved. The machinery of justice was beginning to turn. Knox opened his laptop and began preparing for the meeting. He created a presentation summarizing the key evidence, organized his timeline into clear categories, and prepared answers for the questions he knew they would ask. He wasn't nervous. He was ready. The library meeting exceeded Knox's expectations in every way. Amanda Chun from a Youth Advocacy Center was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who radiated competence and genuine concern. The lawyer she brought with her, David Morrison, looked like someone who'd been fighting for kids for a long time and hadn't lost his passion for the work. They met in a private study room where Knox could spread out his documentation without worrying about being overheard or observed. "This is the most comprehensive case file I've seen from a minor," Morrison said as he reviewed Knox's evidence folder. "How did you know to collect all of this?" "Research," Knox said. "I spent a lot of time reading about what kind of evidence actually holds up in court." Amanda looked up from the medical records. "Knox, some of these injuries are severe. Why didn't you report them when they happened?" Knox had expected this question and prepared his answer carefully. "I tried reporting things a few times when I was younger, but adults either didn't believe me, said family arguments weren't their business, or suggested I was probably exaggerating what happened. I realized that without proof, it was just my word against theirs. So you decided to create irrefutable proof. Yes. Morrison connected Knox's data drive to his laptop and began reviewing the digital evidence. You've essentially built a prosecutable criminal case here. Timeline documentation, medical evidence, witness statements, audio and video proof of threats and violence. This goes beyond just seeking emancipation. What do you mean? I mean your brother could face serious criminal charges for assault and battery of a minor. Your parents could face charges for child endangerment, failure to protect, and conspiracy to conceal abuse. Knox felt something cold and satisfied settle in his chest. Good. Amanda and Morrison exchanged a meaningful look. Knox, Amanda said carefully, what we're seeing here suggests a very deliberate campaign to document ongoing abuse while continuing to endure it. That's incredibly dangerous strategy. You could have been killed. I was already in danger every day, Knox replied. At least this way, there would be evidence if something happened to me. Morrison leaned forward. The courts will take this very seriously, but they'll also ask pointed questions about your methodology. Defense attorneys will try to paint you as manipulative, as someone who deliberately provoked violence to create evidence. You need to be prepared for that line of attack. Knox met his eyes directly. I'm prepared. I didn't create the violence. I documented it. Everything they did was their choice. I just made sure there was proof this time. The room was quiet for a moment as both adults absorbed the implications of what Knox was saying. How old are you again? Morrison asked. 17. Morrison shook his head slowly. You've essentially conducted a better investigation than most police departments would manage. This level of strategic thinking and evidence collection, it's remarkable. Knox didn't respond to the compliment. He wasn't looking for praise. He was looking for results. Amanda opened her laptop and began typing. We're going to file for emergency emancipation based on documented abuse and imminent danger. Given the strength of your evidence, I expect the court will fast-track the hearing. How fast? Within 2 weeks, possibly sooner. Knox nodded. What do I need to do? Morrison was still reviewing the digital files. You need to be prepared to testify about what you've experienced. But with this level of documentation, your testimony will be supported by objective evidence. That makes your case much stronger. They spent another hour going through legal strategy and logistics. Knox answered their questions with the same methodical precision he'd applied to building his case. He wasn't emotional or dramatic. He presented facts and let them speak for themselves. They prepared to leave. Amanda looked at Knox with something that might have been admiration. You know, most abuse victims spend years hoping someone will rescue them. You rescued yourself. Knox packed up his evidence folder. No one was coming to save me, so I saved myself. The petition for emancipation was filed within a week. Because of the documented abuse and the threat to Knox's safety, the court fast-tracked the hearing. Knox didn't tell his family about the court date until the night before the hearing. He waited until they were all in the living room, Curtis in his recliner reading the newspaper, Marla on the couch folding laundry, Silas sprawled on the floor playing video games. I have a court hearing tomorrow at 10 a.m., Knox said from the doorway. The words dropped into the room like a grenade. Curtis's newspaper rustled as he lowered it. Marla's hands stopped moving. Silas paused his game and turned around. What kind of court hearing? Curtis's voice was carefully controlled. Emancipation. I'm petitioning to be legally recognized as an adult. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Knox watched their faces process this information, watched the implications sink in. You can't do that, Marla said finally. You're 17 years old. You're not ready to live on your own. I've been living on my own for years, Knox replied. You just been here while I did it. Curtis stood up slowly. This is ridiculous. We're your parents. We love you. Families have problems, but you don't solve them by running to court. Knox stared at his father with the same level expression he'd perfected over months of documentation. When was the last time you asked how school was going? What? When was the last time you asked if I needed help with homework? Or if I was okay after Silas hurt me? When was the last time either of you acted like you cared whether I lived or died? Curtis opened his mouth, then closed it. Knox could see him struggling to remember a single instance of parental concern or involvement. That's not. We show we care in different ways, Marla said weakly. Like how you showed you cared when Silas broke my nose. When you took the phone away, so I couldn't call for help. Marla flinched. You were being dramatic. It wasn't that serious. Knox touched his nose, which still wasn't quite straight after healing incorrectly. It required surgery to fix properly. Surgery I paid for myself because you refused to take me to a doctor. We don't have good insurance. You have insurance for Silas's sports injuries. You found money for his car repairs and his cell phone and his college application fees. The room was completely quiet now, except for the sound of the video games Silas had forgotten to pause. Knox turned to go upstairs, then stopped. The lawyer has everything. 3 years of documentation. Photos, recordings, medical records, school attendance data. You can try to convince the judge I'm lying, but the evidence speaks for itself. He left them sitting in the living room, staring at each other with the dawning realization that their youngest son had been building a case against them for years. Knox went to his room and finished packing the few belongings he planned to take with him. Clothes, books, his laptop, and the external hard drives containing backups of all his evidence. Everything else could stay. He was building a new life, not dragging the old one along. That night, Knox lay in bed listening to the hushed, urgent conversations happening throughout the house. His parents arguing in their bedroom. Silas pacing in his room, occasionally slamming something against the wall. Phone calls to relatives and family friends, trying to understand what was happening and how to stop it. Knox felt no satisfaction in their panic, no pleasure in their fear, just a cold certainty that he was finally taking control of his own life. Tomorrow, everything would change. One way or another, he would be free. The courthouse was smaller than Knox had expected. He sat in the hallway outside the family courtroom with Morrison, reviewing their strategy one last time. Remember, you don't have to defend your methods, Morrison said. You just have to tell the truth about what happened to you and why emancipation is in your best interest. Knox nodded. His stomach was tight, but his mind was clear. He'd prepared for this moment for months. Curtis and Marla arrived 20 minutes late with a lawyer Knox didn't recognize. It looked like they'd been fighting. Silas wasn't with them. Where's your son, Silas? Morrison asked their lawyer. He declined to attend, the lawyer replied. Knox almost smiled. Of course, Silas wasn't here. He didn't want to answer questions about the videos. The hearing took 2 hours. Knox presented his case methodically. He didn't embellish or dramatize. He just laid out the facts. Dates, times, injuries, lack of parental protection or intervention. Morrison introduced 43 documented incidents into evidence. Photos with metadata proving when they were taken. Audio recordings with timestamps. Medical records showing suspicious injuries. School records documenting absences after violent incidents that Curtis's lawyer tried to paint Knox as manipulative and dishonest. Your Honor, this young man has clearly orchestrated an elaborate scheme to make his family look bad. He admits to provoking conflicts and recording them secretly. I documented abuse, Knox corrected. I didn't create it. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, reviewed the evidence binder. She spent a long time on the photos, longer on the medical records. Mr. Rayner, she said to Curtis, how do you explain these injuries to your son? Boys fight sometimes. Brothers especially. It's normal. Is it normal for a 17-year-old to have a broken nose, fractured ribs, and documented bruising on 43 separate occasions? Curtis looked at his lawyer, who whispered something in his ear. Kids exaggerate, Curtis said finally. The judge held up a photo of Knox's face after the kitchen incident. Does this look exaggerated to you? Curtis didn't answer. Mrs. Rayner, the judge turned to Marla. You were present during many of these incidents. Why didn't you seek medical attention for your son? He said he was fine. A 17-year-old with a clearly broken nose said he was fine, and you accepted that? Marla's voice got smaller. We don't have good insurance. Emergency rooms are expensive. Knox watched his parents lie and minimize and make excuses. Everything he'd predicted they would do. The judge asked Knox why he wanted emancipation instead of foster care. I don't need to be taken care of, Knox said. I've been taking care of myself for years. I have a job, good grades, a plan for college. I just need legal recognition that I'm independent from people who hurt me. What do you plan to do about housing? I have arrangements with a family friend for temporary housing until I can establish my own lease. Morrison presented letters from Knox's employer, his teachers, and Zadie's aunt confirming his maturity and self-sufficiency. The judge deliberated for 20 minutes. When she came back, her expression was set. In the matter of Lennox Rayner's petition for emancipation, I find that the minor has demonstrated both the need and ability to live independently. The documented pattern of abuse and parental failure to protect creates an unsafe environment that is not in the minor's best interest. Knox felt his heart rate accelerate, but kept his face neutral. Furthermore, the comprehensive documentation presented suggests a level of maturity and planning that supports the minor's ability to make adult decisions. Emancipation is granted. Curtis jumped up. Your Honor, this is ridiculous. He's manipulated everyone. Mr. Rayner, your son presented 43 documented incidents of abuse spanning 3 years. He didn't manipulate anyone. He simply ensured that the truth couldn't be ignored. The judge looked directly at Knox. Son, you'll receive your emancipation papers within a week. You'll be legally considered an adult with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. Knox nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. As they left the courthouse, Curtis grabbed Knox's arm. You think you've won something here? You just destroyed your own family. Knox looked down at his father's hand, then up at his face. I didn't destroy anything. I documented what was already broken. He pulled his arm free and walked away. The fallout was swift and thorough. Within a month, Curtis lost his position with a local veterans organization when word spread about the abuse case. Marlowe was quietly removed from the school board after the district reviewed the court records. Silas, now 18, received a visit from police investigating assault and battery charges against a minor. The prosecutor decided to move forward based on Knox's video evidence. Knox heard about it all secondhand. He'd moved into a studio apartment above Zadie's aunt's garage and was working extra hours at his job to cover rent and expenses. The lawyers called periodically with updates. Settlement offers from his parents' insurance company. Plea negotiations for Silas. Knox declined the settlements and refused to support any plea deals that didn't include admission of guilt. They want this to go away quietly, Morrison explained during one of their meetings. They're offering significant compensation in exchange for a confidentiality agreement. No, Knox, the amount they're offering could pay for your entire college education. I don't want their money. I want accountability. Morrison studied him. This isn't about money for you, is it? It was never about money. 3 months after the emancipation hearing, Knox received a letter forwarded from his old address. The return address was unfamiliar, but he recognized the name. Brinley Morrison. He opened it in his apartment, sitting at the small table by the window. Knox, I don't know if you'll read this, but I needed to write it. I found out what really happened with your family. About the court case and everything that I know you sent me, that recording about Silas. I know you were trying to warn me. I should have listened sooner. I should have seen what kind of person he really was. That I'm sorry I didn't believe you right away. I'm sorry you had to go through all of that alone. That I hope you're doing okay now. I hope you're safe. Thank you for warning me. Even though I didn't listen at first. Brinley. Knox read the letter twice, then folded it and put it in a box labeled closure that he kept on his closet shelf. He didn't write back. He didn't need to. The letter wasn't asking for forgiveness or friendship. It was just acknowledgement. Recognition that his actions had protected someone else, even when protecting himself. That night, Knox sat at his computer working on college applications. He had good grades, strong test scores, and a unique personal statement about overcoming adversity through systematic documentation and legal advocacy. His phone buzzed with a text from Morrison. Silas pled guilty to assault and battery. 2 years probation, mandatory anger management, community service. Official record of conviction. Knox typed back. Good. He saved his college application and closed the laptop. Tomorrow he had work, then class, then more applications to finish. Normal teenage problems. Normal teenage stress that he'd build a new life on his own terms. A life where no one could hurt him without consequences. where his voice couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Knox had survived. He'd escaped, and he'd done it without compromising his principles or accepting anyone's excuses. He'd never forgive his family for what they'd done. He'd never pretend it was okay or normal or understandable, but he didn't need to. He'd built something better than forgiveness, that he'd built justice.